Good morning, this is Jianli Hu. In class, we talk about how to use Excel software to find a solution for some of the problems that can be modeled as what we call linear programming. Now, let's review the example here. This is the example where the bakery store have to have two types of cakes. It's either chocolate or vanilla. Every chocolate cake can bring a revenue amount of $12. Every vanilla cake can be sold for $9. Each chocolate cake requires 20 minutes of baking time and uses 4 eggs. Each vanilla cake requires 40 minutes of baking time and uses 1 egg. And the constraints are, so the limits on the resources are, we have 8 hours of baking time and 30 eggs. So this is just one example. We can extend the example to, for example, fashion making. So if you have several styles and each style you can sell for different price, and each style may use different amount of fabric, different amount of labor time, and so on. So in that case, we need to find out what will be the best mix of the production we can make. So in this case, our decision variable is basically the number of cakes we can make. So we don't know yet. We don't know how many chocolate cake we should be making, how many vanilla cake we should be making. But the goal for business is to make money. So in this case, the goal for the bakery is to maximize the revenue it can make. So what is the revenue? The revenue is related to how many cakes we can sell. So for this particular example, the revenue is related to, well, the chocolate cake can bring in $12 per cake. Vanilla cake can be bringing $9 per cake. So our decision variables are the number of chocolate cakes and number of vanilla cakes, and the goal is to maximize the total revenue. So in this case, the total revenue is going to be $12 times number of chocolate cake plus $9 times number of vanilla cake. Now the constraints are, well, we do have a limited amount of baking time, so we only have 8-hour baking time and we have 30 eggs. And what should we do about it? Because every cake, they take some baking time and they take some eggs, and we want to allocate the resources in the most optimal way. So the way to do it is to use Excel, and this is the setup we had in class, and I just want to briefly review what happened in the setup. Now at the beginning, we don't know how many cakes, how many units of each cake to make. So usually my way of setup, I set up at the beginning, just set up as 0, and later I let Excel play with it to find the best number of cakes for each. So the light blue cell range we see here, this is the number of chocolate cake, number of vanilla cake. Later we're going to find decisions about. So at the beginning is 0. And every chocolate cake sold for $12. Every vanilla cake is sold for $9. Then we can calculate the total revenue. Now how do we calculate total revenue? The formula here I used is a shortcut formula in Excel, and I really like this shortcut. It's called sum product. So as you can see, I'm summing up the multiplication product between two ranges. The first range is the unit price. The second range is the number of cakes we're going to make. So basically, the total revenue formula is actually related to 12 times how many cakes we're going to make, chocolate cake we're going to make, plus 9 times how many vanilla cake we're going to make. But to simplify my calculation, I usually just use sum product formula, and I use the first range is the price range. The second range is the number of the number of cakes I'm going to make. So don't make the mistake. Some of you may go for vertically and that's incorrect. It should be horizontally you select the range, because what it does is Excel is going to multiply the first one from each range, multiply them together, and add it to the second one in each range, multiply it together. So if you have more than 2 cakes, if you have like 10 different cakes you're going to make, then it's going to be the same way. You're going to write down all the prices and multiply with the individual quantity you're going to have. So remember, keep in mind you should go the horizontal way when you select. Of course, if you set up in the vertical way, then you can do that, but the setup we have for this example, I set it up all the prices and other quantity, they go in the horizontal way. Okay, then the constraints are, now the constraints is probably the confusing part. Now remember, we have 8 hours of baking time and 30 eggs. So what we need to do is we need to calculate, well, for the decision we're going to make, how much baking time that will take. Now, in this case, we know every chocolate cake takes 20 minutes of baking time. Every vanilla cake takes 40 minutes of baking time. So the amount of the time we need is going to be equal to, again, I'm using a sum product formula here. So what we do here is we're going to sum product, we're going to multiply 20 with the number of chocolate cake plus 40 times number of vanilla cake, because that's the baking time required for each cake. Then the total time here is going to be equal to sum product of the baking time times corresponding to the number of cakes we're going to make. So that's where we see the formula. Sum product of B10 to C10 multiplied by B4 to C4. And you may notice here I used the dollar sign for B4 to C4. The reason I'm using it is because that way I can directly copy it down to the number of eggs. Because we know each chocolate cake needs 4 eggs, each vanilla cake needs 1 egg. So if I just copy and paste, then it's going to be 4 eggs times number of chocolate cake plus 1 egg times vanilla cake. So by fixing B4 to C4, it helped me when I copy and paste. But of course you don't have to do that. If you feel it's too difficult to understand, well, we don't need to. So here I'm going to show you how to type the formula. It's going to be equal to sum product of B11 to C11 and B4 to C4. Okay, that's how we're going to do that. Alright, so I'll set it back to, so after we type out the formulas, now we can play with it a little bit. Well, we can see, well, what if we want to make 8 chocolate cake and 5 vanilla cake? Is that going to work? Well, in this case, we're going to have $141 revenue, and the baking time okay. We only use 360 minutes, while we actually have 8 hours, that's 480 minutes. However, if we have this kind of production plan, unfortunately, we're not going to have enough eggs. In this case, we have to use 37 eggs, but we only have 30. It's too late to go to the supermarket to buy more eggs. So you can play with, what if we make 5 chocolate cake and let's say 6 vanilla cake? Well, is that going to work? Well, it works because in this case we have $114 in revenue. We're going to use 340 minutes of the baking time, but 26 eggs. So we have more room. So let's say, what if we make 10 vanilla cake and 5 chocolate cake? Well, in this case, we use all the 30 eggs, but unfortunately, we went over 20 minutes for baking, but we could make 150 minutes, $150. So, which is a good news, but unfortunately, we don't have enough baking time. So, how about 9 vanilla cakes? Well, that's pretty good. We have $141, and we have some room in baking, and we have some eggs left, so that's a good choice. So you can play with maybe 8 chocolate cake to vanilla cake. Well, the money goes down. How about 8 chocolate cake, 5 vanilla cake? No, then in that case we don't have enough eggs. So as we can see, well, you can play with it, but it's hard to tell which combination is going to give you the highest income, so the highest revenue. So that's why we want Excel to help us. So instead of random guessing them, I'm just going to go back to ground zero, and I'm going to ask Excel to find the solution for me. So what I'm going to do is, if you have a PC, go click data, and you're going to find the button for solver. Okay, I want to tell Excel what is my goal. So I want to tell Excel, well, as a manager, my goal is to make money. So the way I do it is I go for the first set objective, and I click on the corner. There's a button here with a red arrow. I click here and select revenue. That's my goal. So revenue, that's B7. So I'm going to select B7, and I tell Excel, please help me to maximize. So max means we want to get as much as possible. Please help me maximize revenue. Now, if Excel, after we tell Excel that's our goal, we have to tell Excel where Excel can have the room to change. Excel cannot change the baking time. Excel cannot change the unit price. Excel cannot change the number of eggs needed. But Excel can change is where we played. So the variable cell, here I'm going to click, and I'm going to tell Excel, well, please, you can change anything here. So the light blue cell is where Excel, the software, can play with. So Excel can try different combination here, as long as the combination Excel find is going to meet the constraint we have in operations. So the constraints are, so subject to the following constraint, and I'm going to click the add button, and the first constraint I'm going to tell Excel is my baking time, which is D10 is the total baking time based on my production plan, has to be less or equal to 480 minutes. That's where I type in F10. So B10 has to be less or equal to F10. And the second constraint I'm going to have is, well, X is limited to, so my D11 has to be less or equal to F11. And the last constraint I want to tell Excel is, well, whatever you're going to do, you're going to play, Excel going to try different combination of chocolate cake and vanilla cake. But Excel need to keep in mind, well, I cannot produce fractional number of cakes. So that's how for B4 to C4, I need to tell Excel it has to be whole number. And I'm going to click OK. So that's how I have 3 constraints. Well, sometimes once you get familiar with the process, you can actually do the 2 constraints D10, D11 together. So you can highlight D10 to D11, then make them less or equal to F10 to F11. Excel will do one by one matching directly if you enter the 2 constraints at once. That's also allowed by Excel. The several things we have to do after we enter the constraint. The first one is just check here. the first one, this part, make unconstrained variable non-negative. Now remember, when we make cakes or when we produce dresses or when we produce t-shirt or other things, well, the number of t-shirt, number of dresses, number of cakes, or number of workers too high, and so on. Later we're going to learn. Well, you cannot do negative number. You cannot say I'm going to produce minus 10 chocolate cake. That's not going to happen in real world. You cannot say I'm going to produce minus 5 size small t-shirt. So I can create more resources for other t-shirts. You cannot say I'm going to produce minus 150 of these dresses. That's not going to be happening in real life. So the first thing is you want to make sure this one's checked. And solving method, you want to make sure the second one, the simplex LP, we're still in linear programming. Someday if you go to grad school, maybe they're going to teach you nonlinear programming. Well, that's a different case. So make sure you always choose the second one, the simplex method. Then click options here. Make sure you check the third box here. Ignore integer constraint. This box has to be unchecked. So view the third box, make sure it's unchecked. This one has to be left blank. Okay? Then after you check all those, now you can click solve. And Excel will say, well, it found a solution. That's a good news. So do you want to keep it? Do you want to restore the original value? I suggest you keep it unless there's something wrong, unless you find, well, you made a mistake. Well, click OK. Now, Excel gives us a solution that helps you optimize your production plan. So Excel said, well, produce 5 chocolate cake and 9 vanilla cake. It will give you the total revenue of $141. And you will have 460 minutes of baking time. How did we get that? 20 times 5 plus 40 times 9. That's total is 460 minutes. And you're going to use 29x. So you have 20 minutes leeway in scheduling, and you have 1 egg left. So this is the best production plan. It gives you the maximum, it maximizes your revenue, and also it follows the constraint, the limit you have for either your working time or the resources available. So that's how we use Excel to do it. And for the homework question, I put out my management lab. It's actually quite similar. You also have 2 kinds of product to make. One product is a little bit more expensive than the other one in terms of the sales price, but it may use a little bit more resources, either the fabric or the work time. So you're going to set up similar to this one. Your constraint in that case is going to be fabric and labor time. Then you're going to calculate, basically use the same formula, but with different, the right hand side, the number. So you have different amount of fabric and different amount of the labor time. Okay. All right, so this is how we use Excel to find the solution. If you are using a different version of Microsoft Office, your button may be slightly different. For PC, it's always under Data. For Mac, I believe it is usually under Tools and Adding, and from there you can add software. If you use a PC, make sure you click on File, check Options, and go to Adding, and Manage Excel Adding. That's the bottom here. Click Go, and make sure I use Analysis Toolpack. Those are for myself, but you want to make sure software is added into the software, and click OK. So that's where you can find the software button after you install it. All right, please feel free to email me or call me or text me if you have any questions.